Marcy, Skylight, Gray, Cliff, and Redfield done. Now the long walk back to the lodge. 3:55 a.m., just signed in. Santanoni Range, let's go. The wind is whipping here in the Seward Range today. Just finished the Macomb slide and my legs are on fire. Well, I fell victim to the floating logs again. Made it to the top of East Dix. Peak number 3 of 5 for today here in the Dix Range. Avalanche Pass. On top of Rocky Peak Ridge. It's like a hurricane up here. Rain and wind here on Tabletop. Whiteface, number 6. Muddy day here on Street and Nye for number 7 and 8. Sunny and blue on Haystack. Algonquin, up in the clouds, number 18. Gothic's number 22. Panther, number 38. Allen, number 45. 7:12 a.m. Big Slide, Adirondack 46er. You're listening to the 46 of 46 podcast. July 1st, 2018. I'm back in the Adirondacks now for the month and ready to hit the trail hard. My quest to become a 46er in one summer picks back up today on the Olympic Whiteface Mountain and Esther Mountain for my third hike and high peaks numbers 5 and 6. My buddy Josh came with me again today, and weather-wise we were experiencing an extremely humid, misty day. Not ideal hiking conditions, but I'm home now and it's time to hit the trail. We'll be gaining over 3,800 feet of elevation today on this roughly 10-mile out-and-back hike, starting with Esther. We'll start by going up and over Marble Mountain to the trail junction. We'll go right at the split out and back to Esther, then head up to Whiteface and back down to the trailhead to complete our day. We signed in again at 5:30 a.m. at the Reservoir Trailhead in Wilmington, snagging one of the few parking spots there, turned on our headlamps, and began our day. The first 0.9 miles of the trip is a nice walk through the woods, gaining little to no elevation, a good warm-up. I enjoy approaches like this to start the day, especially early in the morning. And I remember Josh telling me a story about when he hiked Whiteface the first time. It was early in the morning before the sun had come up. Him and his wife were walking down the trail, and then he stopped to tie his boot a little tighter. And then when he stood up, he turned to the left, and there was an 8-point buck just staring at him right in the face about 10 feet away. And he said he jumped halfway out of his boots. After the first mile, the trail starts going up towards Marble Mountain, and this is the point where it starts to get real. The mile and change climb up to the wooded summit on Marble Mountain is relentless. A lot of elevation gained very quickly, so it's steep and, in my opinion, the most demanding section of the hike. Due to the humidity, we had to stop midway up Marble because Josh started having that nauseous feeling that you get when you're working really hard in humid weather. You know how it is. I was pretty glad to stop because I was huffing and puffing for sure. I needed a break too. It's steep. He eventually got it together, and to this day he says he has never felt worse hiking than he did at that moment hiking up Marble Mountain. And he's a 46er, so he's done a little bit of hiking. It was humid, that's for sure, it was humid. But we continued up the Marble Mountain Trail to the Marble Summit, which is a wooded summit with some views through the trees, but nothing really worth sticking around or exploring for. At this point you join the Wilmington Trail, which goes to the Esther Trail Split as well as to the Whiteface Summit. Thankfully, a big chunk of the elevation was gained by this point, and the section of trail from Marble to the trail split for Esther is a breeze, especially after what we just hiked. It clocks in at around 1.3 miles or so from Marble to the Esther split. You're still gaining elevation, but not quite as quickly. Still no sign of people yet on the day, as we were the first people to sign in again today. And of course, we wouldn't see any sign of human life until our descent back from Whiteface later in the day. Always sign in early when you're hiking in the high peaks. Exactly 2 hours into our hike, we landed at the Esther Trail Split, which is humanly impossible to miss. It's a large, flat clearing with a boulder and the biggest pile of rocks you'll ever see. Well, maybe it's not that big, but it's definitely an enormous pile of rocks. It's not a cairn, it's a huge pile of rocks marking the Esther Trail. So we gulped some water with Noon tablets, which is Josh and my electrolyte of choice option on the trail, and we began the mile trek up the unmarked and unmaintained Esther Trail. It's a typical unmarked trail you'll find in the Adirondacks. Muddy, stepping on tons of slippery roots. I personally find tree roots to be my least favorite style of terrain for hiking due to the slip factor. Big guys like me don't need to slip and fall to the ground without warning. Planet Earth doesn't need that. Which is exactly what seems to happen to me on these herd path trails, unfortunately. Though don't worry, I took my share of falls in the high peaks and you'll hear all about them, but not on this day, fortunately. And we plugged along and we made it up the muddy Esther Trail in 35 minutes to the wooded summit at 7:05 a.m., 4,270 feet elevation for high peak number 5. just over 2.5 hours into the day. Esther. Another cloudy Wilmington viewless day. Esther, number 5. Esther's summit is wooded with minimal views, but it's marked by a really cool plaque in the ground which reads, Mount Esther, 4,270 feet. To celebrate the indomitable spirit of Esther McComb, age 15, who made the first recorded ascent of this peak for the sheer joy of climbing. And it has the original 46er organization logo along with Troy, New York written on it. Awesome. If you couldn't tell, the mountain is named after Esther McComb, who first climbed this mountain at 15 years old in 1839. She thought she was hiking Whiteface, but ended up on this mountain. Even better. And if you think about being 15 in 1839 and climbing a mountain like this, where there's no trails, there's no DEC to come get you when you're lost. Truly incredible. Esther is also the northernmost high peak mountain, close to our Canadian friends. There's a trivia question for you. So along with Whiteface, it offers some very different views than you'll get in the high peaks. After a short break of maybe 3 minutes, remember no views that day, and Josh and I don't tend to stay on summits more than 5 to 10 minutes as it is on a sunny day, let alone cloudy and misty. We headed back to the trail split, which took 30 minutes or so to return to the world's biggest pile of rocks. We then immediately continued up the Wilmington Trail towards the summit of Whiteface Mountain. The Olympic hosting Whiteface Mountain, that is. Which also has the greatest vertical drop east of the Rockies for all you skiers and snowboarders out there. Everyone always goes to Vermont. I don't understand why they always go to Vermont. Go to Whiteface, people, not Vermont. This part of the trail has a large mix of slabs, narrow trail, woods trail. It's a pretty gradual climb from here on out, and the hiking trail eventually comes out to a ski trail. It opens up onto Whiteface Ski Mountain's Wilmington Trail. Very fitting. And this is a blue square trail for all you skiers and snowboarders out there. And remember those super short skis? They were cool in the 90s for like maybe 1 season, 2 seasons. Snowblades. For all you skiers, snowboarders, and snowbladers out there, it is a blue square trail. The sun was trying to come out at this point, and since it's the middle of the summer and no one's around, of course I went onto the ski lift, I sat on the chair and had Josh snap a photo. Of course I'm going to do that, come on. So we carried on up the trail and eventually came to the giant stone wall at the Memorial Highway. It kind of ruins the mountain experience when you come to a paved double yellow line road midway up the mountain, but at the same time it's cool because it's a unique element for this mountain in particular. Gives it some character. And the trail continues along the side of the highway for a short minute and eventually continues up and out of the tree line for a long scramble towards the summit. You'll be following the yellow spray-painted lines on the slab for a good portion at the end of the ascent, which is cool, and it's nice to be out in the open and overlooking the ski trails. The summit then just suddenly appears, seemingly out of nowhere, and you see the weather center and you're just boom, there, ready to hang out with all the tourists who drove their cars to the top. We summited the historic Whiteface Mountain at 8:40 a.m., just over 3 hours into our day, standing 4,867 feet, the 5th tallest mountain in the Adirondacks for high peak number 6 of 46. It took 55 minutes from the Esther Trail Junction to the summit. Since it was still quite early in the morning, there were no tourists up there yet on this rainy, windy, humid, foggy, viewless day, and we had the summit to ourselves. So this makes 2 hikes in a row with little to no views, but I didn't mind too much today because I've been up Whiteface in a car a number of times throughout my life, so I know what the views up here are like. On a clear day, you can even see Montreal way in the distance, which is pretty cool. And the summit is fantastic. It's a large rocky summit with full 360 views and a weather station, along with the wooden decks throughout. And since we made it to the top, it was time to feast. So Josh and I sat down to eat our sandwiches. And it was actually really cool and a unique and albeit eerie experience being the only people at the top of Whiteface. And on this day in particular, you could only see a good 10 feet in front of you. So Josh and I sat down and ate only 10 feet apart, but we couldn't see each other. Spooky, but cool. We spent around 20 minutes up top, and then it was time for the long descent and the beginning of the pain train. We made great time getting back to the tree line and away from the Memorial Highway, which is where we passed our first couple of the day, probably in their mid to late 30s. Whiteface is definitely a tough hike. After all, it is the 5th highest high peak, so that would explain the additional amount of knee and toe pain that day. Speaking of pain, I opted to hike this day in New Balance trail running shoes, which are really just a beefed up sneaker. Josh's wife, Emily, hiked the entire 46 high peaks in the same pair of tennis sneakers, so through her inspiration, I opted for extreme comfort on my feet today. If she did the whole 46 in one pair of sneakers, I'm going to be comfortable today. Unfortunately for me, I didn't seem to have the shoes tied tight enough, I think because my toes were getting jammed into the front of my shoe during the descent. Much more than usual. So much so that at the end of the day, my middle toenails on both feet were black and blue. Terrible. That on top of the typical knee pain I always experience made for a somewhat painful trip down Whiteface. And we started passing a good amount of groups going up at this point in the day. Probably people who started hiking at 10 a.m. or 11 a.m. Classic.
I've got another confession.
There was even one group of shirtless jabroni dudes blasting a Bluetooth speaker in their enormous backpacks. So that was cool. Let me just say, don't be the dude blasting a speaker on the trail. If you want to jam some tunes while you hike, be my guest. But wear headphones so the rest of us can enjoy the sounds of the woods. I mean, that's why we're there. But also don't wear headphones where you can't hear your surroundings either. You can't hear someone coming up behind you. You can't hear the bear or the Sasquatch coming up behind you trying to pass you. Wear one earbud. That's the appropriate way to listen to music when you're hiking. In my opinion. But that's just my opinion. Shortly after, we passed a group of girls who were just beginning the climb up to Marble Mountain. And remember how tough that climb was earlier in the day that I mentioned? They were struggling hard. I actually felt really bad because, of course, they asked how much further, and I didn't want to crush their souls, but they were also multiple hours from being at the top. I told them they have a few more hours to the summit, and they weren't thrilled about the news. As we left, one of them said, "Enjoy the descent," which Josh and I often laugh about because the descent is what always destroys our bodies. It's not really an enjoyable experience. Once we got off Marble Mountain, we made a left and headed the final flattish mile through the woods back to the car. It was here where we decided we needed to jump in a lake on the way home. It was all I was thinking about. A humid, sweaty day, I just want to jump in a fresh, beautiful Adirondack lake. Clothes, boots, and all. Even my backpack. I'm going in with everything. Well, not my backpack, but you get the idea. We made it back to the reservoir to our car 2 hours, 20 minutes after leaving the Whiteface summit, clocking our 10-mile day in at 7 hours exactly. Now that we were back at the car, we had one more task to accomplish. I needed to jump in a lake. So on our way around the mountain towards Saranac Lake, we found our spot. We pulled over, got out of the car, stripped down to our shorts, and jumped in. Victory. So sweet, it almost brought tears to my eyes. The water was so cold and so perfect. The ultimate ending to a great day on the trail. Another successful day in the woods on my third High Peaks hike where I summited Esther and Whiteface for peaks numbers 5 and 6. My goal to hiking all 46 high peaks in one summer is well underway, and July is the month I've been waiting for, so this is only the beginning here on July 1st. I would go on to summit a total of 28 high peaks this month, so the adventure is just getting started. Next time on 46 of 46, just 2 days after Whiteface and Esther, I'll head out on my first solo hike up unmaintained trails, and I'll experience my worst self-inflicted wounds of the summer, over on Street and 9. That's next time on 46 of 46. Remember to always leave no trace, do the rock hop, and if you carry it in, carry it out. See you on the trails. Whiteface. Not a great day for a nice view. Not a great day. Number 6 in the books.